If you've been dealing with chronic constipation for a while and you've been reaching for something from the pharmacy to manage it, something with senna in it, something labeled natural or gentle or herbal, I need you to stay with me for the next few minutes. Because what I'm about to tell you is something most people in that situation have never been told. Not by the label on the product, not always by their doctor, and certainly not by the company that makes the thing. Senna is one of the most commonly used laxatives in the world. It's in teas, in tablets, in products sold everywhere, including in sections of the pharmacy, specifically labeled natural remedies. And the very thing being taken to manage the problem is over time making the gut less capable of working without it. And for many people over 60, it has become a daily habit, something they take every morning or every night, something they believe is managing the problem. Here is what I've come to see after years of sitting with patients who have been doing exactly that. In many of those cases, the colon has quietly stopped doing something it was designed to do on its own, and the very thing being taken to manage the problem is over time making the gut less capable of working without it. Today, I'm going to go through 8 things most people believe about constipation, 8 assumptions that feel reasonable, that sound right, that have been repeated so many times, they've become accepted, and show you one by one why those beliefs are costing real people something they don't have to lose, their gut's own ability to function. My name is Dr. Nora Khalil. I've been in practice for 12 years, and for most of that time, a significant part of my patient population has been adults over 60. Digestive health, constipation specifically, comes up constantly, and in all that time, I've noticed something that I think is important enough to talk about here. The way most people understand constipation, what causes it, what fixes it, what's happening inside the body is significantly off. Not because people aren't trying to understand, but because the available information is so shaped by marketing that the medical reality gets lost. Let's go through this together. Before we get into each belief, I want to give you the foundation that makes everything else make sense. The colon, your large intestine, is not a pipe. It is a muscle. A long, living, coordinated muscle with its own nervous system embedded in its wall. There are more neurons in the gut than in the entire spinal cord. Researchers call it the entic nervous system, the second brain. And while I'm usually careful about that kind of language, in this case, the comparison is anatomically earned. What this means is that the colon doesn't move passively, waiting for something to push through it. It contracts in coordinated waves. It has rhythm. It responds to signals, warmth, volume, movement, the morning light, the stretch of a full stomach. It is an active, coordinated system, and like any system built on rhythm and coordination, it can be disrupted. It can be trained into good patterns and bad ones. It can habituate to stimuli. It can be silenced. Almost every myth I'm going to walk through today is rooted in the same misunderstanding that constipation is a plumbing problem, that something is stuck and it needs to be forced out. But in most adults over 60, constipation is not a plumbing problem. It is a rhythm problem, a coordination problem, sometimes a hydration problem, sometimes a nerve signal problem. And treating a rhythm problem by forcing a contraction repeatedly over months and years is like trying to fix a clock by yanking the hands. Keep that in mind. The first myth is probably the most widespread, and I understand why it persists because it feels intuitively right. When something comes from a plant, it feels safe. It feels aligned with how the body was designed to work. It feels like what nature intended. And senna, which appears in teas and tablets in products across every herbal aisle, is indeed a plant. It comes from the leaves and pods of Cassia species. It has been used for centuries, and the word natural on those labels is doing an enormous amount of work that the word cannot actually support. Here is what senna does inside your colon. It contains compounds called anthraquinones. When those compounds reach the large intestine, they irritate the mucosal lining, the inner wall of the colon. That irritation triggers strong, forceful contractions, and those contractions push stool through quickly. That is the mechanism. That is why it works, and why it works within hours. But I want you to notice something specific. The colon was not given a signal to contract the way it normally contracts. A nerve wasn't activated the way food or warmth or physical movement would activate it. The tissue was irritated. The body responded to that irritation by contracting defensively. There is a meaningful difference between a contraction that is part of normal coordinated peristalsis, the wave the colon generates when things are working as they should, and a contraction that is a response to chemical irritation of the lining. That difference matters when you are talking about something used not once but every day for months, for years. Poison ivy causes a significant response from your skin. That does not make poison ivy a skin air product. I am not saying this to alarm anyone who has used senna occasionally in an acute situation used once in a while as a short-term tool. It is a different conversation. What I am talking about, what I see in practice, what the research reflects is the chronic daily assumed safe use of a stimulant laxative under the justification that it is natural. Natural does not mean gentle. Natural does not mean safe at any frequency. And in the case of the colon, this distinction matters more than almost anywhere else. The second myth follows directly from the first, and it is the one that traps people in cycles that go on for years without improvement. It goes something like this. The colon is slow, so it needs to be pushed. It isn't moving on its own. So something has to force it. And when the push stops working as well as it used to, the answer is a stronger push. I understand this completely. It is logical. It is intuitive, and it is almost exactly wrong. Here is what I have seen, and this is one of the observations I carry with me from years of sitting across from patients who have been managing this for a long time. When someone uses a stimulant laxative regularly, the colon adapts. This is what bodies do. They are adaptive. A stimulus that is applied repeatedly becomes over time less stimulating. The nervous system in the gut wall adjusts its threshold. The irritation that once produced a strong, reliable contraction begins to produce a weaker one. And so the dose increases, the frequency increases, and in the meantime, the colon becomes progressively less capable of responding to the signals it was originally designed to respond to. The warm water in the morning, the stretch of a meal arriving in the stomach, the movement of a walk after breakfast, those signals as the quiet, natural physiological signals get drowned out. The colon has been trained to expect something louder. This process has a visible marker in some cases. Researchers have documented changes in the inner lining of the colon associated with long-term anthraquinone use, including a darkening of the tissue called melanosis coli. I'll say clearly, melanosis coli in most cases is not itself a crisis, but it is a sign that something has been happening to that tissue consistently over time. The practical result is the conversation I have regularly with patients. I used to take one tablet and it worked well. Now I take 3 or 4 and it barely does anything. This is not a dosing problem. It is a dependency problem. And the instinct to respond to it by increasing the dose is, and I'll be direct here, exactly the wrong move. It deepens the pattern it's trying to solve. The colon does not need a stronger push. It needs slowly and deliberately to find its own signal. Again, that is a different project entirely from finding a more powerful stimulant. The third myth is about fiber, and I want to be precise here because fiber is important. I'm not here to tell you fiber is the enemy. I'm here to tell you that fiber, when misunderstood, can make constipation measurably worse. The image most people have when they hear fiber supplement is a powder stirred into a glass of water or a capsule or something in a large canister with bold claims on the front. And when people are constipated, they reach for these things with the entirely reasonable belief that more fiber equals a more regular gut. Here is what's missing from that picture. Dry fiber, isolated, powdered, packaged fiber that has not been soaked, not hydrated, not embedded in the living tissue of a whole food, behaves differently in the colon than fiber that arrives in its original context. When you eat a seed that has been soaked overnight, or a piece of fruit with its skin intact, or a legume that has been properly prepared, the fiber in those foods comes with water already built in. It comes with the surrounding structures that allow it to ferment slowly, that help it form a gel, that let it move through the colon with low friction and real lubrication. Dry fiber particles without sufficient accompanying water can do something quite different. They absorb whatever water is available in the colon, including water that was keeping the stool soft. They add bulk without adding the lubrication that makes passage easier. And in people with already slow transit, they can compact. They can make the stool denser, not softer. This is not rare. I've had patients who significantly increased their fiber intake in good faith because they were told to and felt considerably worse within a week because they increased dry fiber without increasing water, without changing the form of the fiber, without understanding that the type of fiber matters as much as the quantity. What works is not the fiber that arrives dehydrated and isolated. It's the fiber that arrives wet and intact. The whole flax seed that has been soaking since the night before. By morning, it has released something called mucilage, a thick gel-like substance from the seed's coat. That gel does something very specific. It lubricates the colon wall. It softens the stool from the outside, not by drawing water out of the body, but by adding moisture that was already there, already hydrated, already gentle. It also protects the mucosal lining. Instead of aerating it, it coats it. That is a completely different experience for the colon than a tablespoon of dry psyllium powder stirred hastily into a glass of water and swallowed quickly. Both are fiber. They are not the same thing. The fourth myth is a soft one, because it's technically true, and because it's technically true, people follow it and then wonder why it doesn't seem to make much difference. Drink more water. People with constipation have heard this their entire lives, and they do drink water, and sometimes things improve a little, and sometimes they don't. And when they don't, they conclude that water isn't really the issue after all. Here is what is almost never explained. The colon is the last stop in digestion. By the time stool reaches the large intestine, the nutrients have been absorbed. What the colon is managing at that point is largely about water. How much water it pulls back into the body and how much remains in the stool. When the body is mildly dehydrated, which many adults over 60 are chronically without feeling particularly thirsty because the sensation of thirst becomes less reliable with age, the colon compensates. It pulls more water out of the stool. The stool becomes dry, dense, slow. So yes, water matters. But there is a more precise version of this that is worth understanding. The first thing that enters your stomach in the morning has an outsized effect on what your colon does in the hours that follow. There is a reflex called the gastrocolic reflex that is activated when volume and warmth arrive in an empty stomach after a night of fasting. When the stomach senses that something has arrived, it sends a signal forward to the colon. We are starting now. Begin the next cycle. It is the body's biological equivalent of an opening signal. Cold water activates this to some degree. Warm water activates it more reliably. Half a liter of warm water drunk slowly in the first 15 or 20 minutes after waking before coffee, before food, before anything else. That is not folk medicine. That is working with a real physiological reflex. My father drank black coffee first thing every morning for as long as I can remember. And I think of him when patients tell me they can't start the day without it. I understand. But coffee, particularly on an empty stomach, has diuretic properties. It pulls fluid out. Starting the day with coffee before water in a body that has already been without fluids for 8 hours can work against the very reflex you're trying to activate. Warm water first, slowly, half a liter. Let the body wake up on its own terms, then have the coffee. It's a small shift. The specificity of it, warm, first, slow, half a liter, nothing else before, is what most people have never been told. And for many patients, it produces a noticeable change within the first week. The fifth myth is the one that frustrates me most quietly, because it leads people to accept a condition that is real, but is not inevitable in the way they've been told. After a certain age, the gut slows down. It's just what happens. My doctor checked everything and said it was normal. I want to be respectful of every colleague who has said this to a patient, because there is a version of it that is true. Things do change with age. The muscles of the gut wall, like other muscles, lose some coordination and tone. The microbiome shifts. The bacterial communities that live in the intestine change in ways that affect how things move. Enzyme production decreases. Motility, the organized wave of contraction that pushes stool forward, slows. All of this is real, but this changes and nothing can address it are not the same sentence. and I've come to believe that when patients hear it's normal for your age, many of them hear, "Stop asking about it." The patients who accept that conclusion stop looking at the factors that are genuinely addressable. They stop asking about magnesium, which is one of the most prevalent nutrient deficiencies in adults over 60, partially because intestinal absorption of magnesium decreases with age, partially because several common medications deplete it, and which is essential for smooth muscle function. The colon is full of smooth muscle. A colon that isn't getting enough magnesium is working under a significant and entirely addressable disadvantage. They stop asking about movement. Physical activity is one of the most direct mechanical stimuli for peristalsis. The colon responds to the body moving through space in a way that sitting simply cannot replicate. Even 15 minutes of walking after a meal does something real to how the colon organizes its contractions. They stop asking about sleep. The colon has its own circadian rhythm. It is more active in the morning after a period of night rest. Disrupted sleep, fragmented, shallow, insufficient, affects how that rhythm expresses itself. None of these are minor. Together, they can account for a significant portion of what gets labeled as just aging. And there is one more angle worth mentioning here. Highly mineralized water, water with a naturally high magnesium content, has genuine research support for its role in constipation. Magnesium in the intestinal lumen attracts water through osmosis. It softens stool. It can help relax muscular tension in the colon wall. Drunk warm on an empty stomach. It works with the gastrocolic reflex rather than around it. It is not a solution for every day and at any quantity. And if you have elevated blood pressure or kidney concerns or cardiovascular considerations, please talk to your doctor before using this regularly. But as a short-term support during a period of rebuilding, it can be meaningful. The body after 60 is not broken. It is changed, and understanding how it has changed is how you begin to work with it, rather than simply managing around it. The sixth myth shows up in its own particular form, and I recognize it immediately when a patient says it. It used to work fine. One tablet a few. Hours later, it moved. Now I take 3 and I barely feel anything. I must need something stronger. I understand why that conclusion follows. The thing isn't working, so you need a more powerful version of the thing. It's logical and it's wrong. Here is what it means when a stimulant laxative stops working at the dose that used to be effective. It doesn't mean the constipation has simply worsened in isolation. It means the colon's responsiveness has changed. And it has changed specifically because of the repeated stimulation. The nervous system in the colon wall has habituated. The signal that once produced a reliable, strong contraction has become over time something like background noise. Think of it this way. You walk into a room where someone has been cooking something fragrant all day. Garlic, maybe. When you walk in from outside, the smell is strong and immediate. If you stay in that room for 2 hours, you stop noticing it. The smell hasn't changed. Your nervous system has adapted to it. It has reclassified that stimulus as background, not signal. Something comparable can happen in the gut. The chemical irritation that once triggered a strong response begins to require more of itself to produce the same result, and the person experiences this as the thing stopped working, when what has actually happened is that the colon's threshold has shifted. The answer to a shifted threshold is not to push harder past it. The real answer, and I say this knowing it is not what anyone wants to hear after years of a routine that at least partially worked, is to give the colon a period of quiet, not an abrupt stop, not cold turkey withdrawal, especially if someone has been using stimulant laxatives for years. That is a conversation to have with a physician, but a gradual, deliberate supported reduction while introducing natural motility support in its place. Warm water in the morning, soaked flaxseed with its gel, prunes which contain sorbitol and phenolic compounds that have documented mild promotility effects without irritating the lining. Walking magnesium if appropriate. This is slower. It requires more attention. It does not produce results in 2 hours, but it is working with the colon's own mechanism, not overriding it. And that is a fundamentally different relationship with the body than what a daily stimulant creates. The 7th myth is the one that keeps people from even trying. I've been on this for years. I've read about what long-term laxative use does to the colon. The nerve damage is done. The tissue has changed. There's no going back. I have a lot of compassion for people who have landed on this conclusion. They've been paying attention, they've done research, they've read about melanosis coli, they've read about lazy colon syndrome, about damaged enteric nerves, and they've concluded not unreasonably based on what they found that the situation is beyond reversing. I want to be careful here, because I am not going to offer false comfort. Yes, long-term stimulant laxative use changes the tissue. Melanosis coli is a real documented finding. Changes in the enteric nervous system associated with chronic stimulant use are real. I won't minimize that. But melanosis coli in most cases is also reversible. Studies have documented its regression after discontinuation of anthraquinone-containing laxatives. The colon's inner lining heals. The enteric nervous system. The gut's own neural network has a capacity for adaptation and remodeling that, in my experience, is consistently underestimated. The colon is living tissue. It is not a fixed structure. What does not recover quickly, and this is the part I think matters most practically, is the habit. The body's learned expectation. The gut that has been told every morning for a decade, you will contract now because I am giving you a chemical signal. That gut, when the chemical signal is withdrawn, does not immediately say, right, I remember how to do this on my own. It takes time, and in that time there are days that feel like nothing is happening. That is where most people give up. That is the moment that gets interpreted as confirmation that the body can't recover, and so they go back. What I have seen in patients who persisted carefully, consistently with proper support and appropriate guidance, is that the colon does find its rhythm. Again, not in 3 days, not necessarily in 1 week, but over the course of several weeks, with consistent hydration, with fiber in its properly prepared form, with walking, with magnesium, with the morning warm water ritual, the gut's own peristalsis begins to reassert itself. The patients who do best in this process are not the ones with the most perfect lab results. They are the ones patient enough to work on their body's timeline, not against it. The 8th myth is the one underneath all the others. The assumption that ties every mistaken belief together. The assumption is this: managing constipation is about finding the right product, the right laxative, the right supplement, the right tea, and once you find it, you take it, and the problem is handled. I want to say this plainly and with respect. No, regularity is not a product. It is not something you purchase. It is something your body does when the conditions for it are in place. When you are genuinely and consistently hydrated. When you are feeding your gut fiber that it can actually work with, that arrives wet and intact, not dry and stripped of its context. When you are moving your body through space every day. When your magnesium status supports the smooth muscle in your colon wall. When the microbiome in your intestine is being fed the things it needs to produce compounds that support movement. When you are honoring the morning reflex your body has had since birth. When those conditions are in place, the colon moves, not because you forced it, because that is what a supported colon does. This is a fundamentally different project from finding the right product. In practice, and I want to be as concrete as possible here because vague advice is not actually useful, this is what it looks like. Half a liter of warm water drunk slowly before anything else in the morning. Not gulped. Slowly give the gastrocolic reflex time to activate. Whole flax seeds soaked overnight in water. By morning, the seed is surrounded by a thick clear gel, mucilage, that is one of the most gentle lubricating forms of soluble fiber available. Use the seed and the liquid together. Do not drain it. That gel is the point. It coats, it protects, it moves through without aerating. Add berries when you can. The pectins in blueberries, in blackberries, in strawberries ferment slowly and feed the beneficial bacteria in the colon, not a supplement of pectin. The fruit itself with its water, with its texture intact. Take prunes seriously. 2 or 3 in the morning. Prunes contain sorbitol, which draws water into the colon gently, and they contain phenolic compounds that have been shown in actual studies, not just traditional use, to have a direct mild promotility effect on the gut. They are not dramatic. They are steady, and steady is what you are trying to rebuild. Walk every day, even 15 minutes matters. Movement stimulates the colon mechanically in a way that sitting does not. The colon responds to the body moving through space. And if you haven't had a conversation with your doctor about magnesium, consider having it not as a supplement taken without context, but as part of an honest look at your nutritional status after 60. Run this protocol with consistency for 5 to 7 days. The effect is usually cumulative. The first few days may feel like very little is changing. By the 4th or 5th day, many people notice a reduction in the feeling of pressure and accumulation. By the end of the week, the gut may begin responding more readily to the morning water. Things may begin to move, not because something forced them, but because the conditions for movement have been restored. That is a different experience from taking a tablet and waiting. It is quieter, it is slower, and it is sustainable in a way that a stimulant laxative used daily is not. I want to leave you with one thought I come back to often. Your colon was designed to move. That is its job. It has been doing that job in varying degrees for your entire life. When it slows down, when it becomes dependent, when it stops responding, that is a signal, not a verdict. A signal about conditions that have changed, and that can in most cases be changed back. The body whispers long before it screams. And if you watched our last video about how a homemade gelatin reduced joint inflammation after 60, I want to mention that the connection between the two is closer than it might appear. The compounds in natural gelatin that support cartilage and joint tissue also support the integrity of the intestinal lining, the very mucosal layer we talked about today. If you haven't seen it, it's worth your time.